Hi there, welcome to the Style Sessions. I'm Roger Mittag. I'm your host for the Style Sessions, and we are most excited that you're with us today. It's time for us to take a look further into the history and development of beers in Great Britain. And we've already started that with British Milds, but now we're going to walk into a few of the others. Over the next 3 to 4 sessions, we're going to talk about mainly British styles. So today, we're going to start a little further back in history. So we're going to start with brown ales. And the beer that I'm featuring today is Big Rock Traditional Ale. And this is, in my eyes, one of the best brown ales you'll ever get. It is fantastic, and it's got a rich history as well. But why don't we pour it, talk about the attributes of the beer first, and then we'll talk a little bit about the history. So I've got one of my favorite glasses, the Prud'homme glass. This is great for malt forward beers because it opens up here in the mouth. My hand wraps around the glass at the bottom, warms it up, and then all the malt characteristics come out near the top. So we're going to take this and pour, as we always do, on a 45-degree angle, building the foam really nicely. And then we get this beautiful looking beer. So put that down. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the beer first of all. So typically with brown ales, we're going to get a reddish brown color to it. Almost a little bit of chestnut, a little bit of auburn in there, teak, very, very light cherry wood once it's been stained. You've got this really nice creamy, buttery colored foam on the top. And it's really creamy on the top. It should be crystal clear because British brewers are pretty adept at creating clarity in their beers. And we have to remind ourselves that clarity is a good thing in brewing because it enhances the drinkability of the beer. So the more cloudiness in a beer, the more mouthfeel in a beer, the more clarity in the beer, the lighter and easier the beer is to drink. So when you're looking at brown ales, what you want to look for are these kinds of characteristics. So on the malt side of it, typically we're looking at brown breads, pumpernickels. You might get things like whole wheat toast in there. You might get darker honey. You're definitely going to get caramel, toffee, mild characteristics of chocolate, and perhaps some nutty characteristics. Varying depending on the types of malts that are being used. You might get things like hazelnut, you might get things like almond as well. So there's a broad variety of different flavor profiles in here. Some dark fruits, definitely things like prunes, dates, raisins should be prevalent in this one. You might think of fruitcakes as well. It's got a lot of profile. Typically speaking, you're not going to find very much hop characteristic on this style of beer because it's a British beer and British hops are typically a little earthier in their characteristics. So you might get some mild earthy notes, forest floor, a little bit of soil, mushrooms, depending on the types of hops that are being used. And other than that, that's where we're going on the aromatics. Flavor profile. Mouthfeel is nice and light. It finishes not quite quick, but a little bit more on the moderate side. It's got a very, very mild lingering aftertaste, and the aftertaste is reminiscent of the kinds of flavors that you're going to get. Predominantly those dark breads and caramel toffee characteristics thrown in with a little bit of nuts. This is a really cool beer because most of the aromatics are reflected in the flavor profiles. It's not as though you're smelling all these different things and then you can't taste it. So you really get that same kind of profile. I find brown ales really nice to drink because they don't overwhelm the palate. They're lighter, easier. And so let's go back into history to understand where brown ales are. Now, we have to understand also, and I've said this in previous sessions, but sometimes recorded evidence of beers is not there, and we have to go off of stories. So the real first mention of brown ales was in the 1600s. So we can probably assume that most beers prior to the 1600s were probably dark and either black or brownish colors to them, because to make malt back in those days you had to heat it up over an open fire, and fire would almost always burn the malt a little further. It wasn't like you could control it. So we should always assume that beers were probably very dark up until about the 1600s, and things will change once I start talking about pale ales, because that revolutionized how we drink beer and how we look at beers as well. So about the 1600s, we start seeing these things called brown ales, and then we start seeing other things come in later, other beer styles like porters, stouts, red ales, pale ales, all came in after this. It is rumored that Mary Queen of Scots was a big fan of brown ales. We don't see a lot of brown ales in the marketplace. There are a few. Some craft brewers are starting to make these British brown ales as well. Sometimes we see American brown ales, which are a little bit more hop forward. They're a little bit darker. You're going to get a little bit more bitterness out of them. The bitterness is very, very mild in this style of beer because it's meant to be a beer that you can drink quite a bit of, and so there's always some balancing act that goes on with British brewing. Very likely that these beers were extremely popular for hundreds of years, and then as the advent of Pilsners, as we've discussed before, changed how a lot of people drank beer. So this is still a solid beer that you're going to see in the marketplace. Newcastle Brown is probably one of the most recognized international brown ales, and I've seen it come back into the marketplace recently. So Newcastle is up in Yorkshire, and they are renowned for making great British brown ales. Samuel Smith also makes a really beautiful brown ale as well. So that's it. That's a little primer on brown ales, so that you know what to expect. There's a range of flavors and colors and aromatics depending on the brewer. So go out, explore, have a great time visiting brown ales. And next time we're going to start talking about pale ales and then stouts. So please check us out on our YouTube channel if you're interested in more beer education. We've got a great beer sommelier program called Prud'homme Beer Certification, and there's 4 different levels in it. You can take 3 of them online. It's really easy to find. You can find us at tfkbeer.com, and as always, I wish you the best. Cheers, and we'll see you